First of all, I want to just say that of all the videos that I have made, hopefully this one will have the greatest positive impact on the world. Abuse impacts more people than you realize, and if you know a lot of people, it's likely that one of them has or will be abused in their lifetime. If you're unlucky enough, that someone may be you. I can show you statistics, but they don't really get the point across. Think about the people you know. It could be a friend of a friend, or it could be the neighbor across the street. Most people we know, we can't see what happens in their lives behind closed doors. So it could be something that you only find out about years later, when someone finds the courage to speak up. People don't talk about abuse because it can be traumatizing or very dangerous if they're currently being abused. It's very common for victims to not really accept that they were being abused by the person that they love either. There are a lot of misunderstandings and myths about domestic violence. It used to be more common to blame the victim of the violence. The common phrase being something like, "Why didn't she just leave if her husband was that bad?" Or they may say a child may have deserved a beating if he disrespected his parents. Now it'd be more common today to hear that all men are to blame for the actions of abusers. Neither of these things are true, and they both sidetrack any meaningful discussions. So why do people come to these conclusions? The assumption that an abused woman could just walk out any time ignores the reality of many abused women. Abusers go to great lengths to maintain complete physical and mental control over their victims. Implying that she could leave any time also inherently suggests that she was complacent in prolonging her own suffering. In reality, she may have had no idea that there was a way out after years of being effectively brainwashed and traumatized. Victim blaming, in my opinion, comes from people who are either uninformed or unwilling to accept that such bad things can actually happen. It is necessary for some people to downplay or outright deny terrible things so that they can keep their beliefs about the world. Some people simply can't accept that bad things can happen to good people, or they feel that something that bad just doesn't happen in our town, so it simply can't have happened. This is pure denial. As for the blaming of the quote patriarchy or all men for domestic abuse, this is the result of people having a stereotypical and sexist view of abuse. This view comes from an easily disproven belief that only women are victims and only men are victimizers. This sort of narrow thinking prevents people from seeing all sorts of people get abused, like children, men, and the elderly. People don't think that 6-foot-tall men will take abuse from their crazy girlfriends, but they do. Domestic violence is not a men's issue or a woman's issue. It's more like a combined series of failures: a failure to identify individual abusers, a failure of the legal system to hold abusers accountable, and a failure to prevent the abusive behavior from happening in the first place. The statistic on top shows that of abused women who were murdered by their abuser, the majority had successfully left or tried to leave the previous year. The statistic on the bottom shows that with 45% of abused, murdered women, the act of the woman trying to leave was directly what caused the abuser to murder her. It's not as simple as just walking out the door, because that can easily result in more beatings or outright murder. I also want to point out that it's very common for abuse to be an endless cycle, a cycle that can involve violence followed by apology, manipulation, and then you forgive your abuser because you think he can change. The cycle may end in your death if you keep believing his lies that he can change, which is why I'm going to emphasize that forgiveness can be fatal. You can end the cycle on your own terms if you can create a good plan to escape. Preferably, you'd also want to collect enough evidence to put him in prison. What I want people to avoid doing is falling into a trap of misunderstanding. When you show someone the statistics that show abusers who own guns are 5 times more likely to kill their female partner, they may say something like, "We need to protect domestic abuse victims from gun violence." This is actually a subtle redefinition of the problem. It shifts focus from the underlying problem that is the abuser to preventing their access to firearms. Even if you prevent an abuser from getting a gun, that doesn't solve the underlying danger the victim is in. It's a narrow view of the situation that ignores the actual problem, that the victimizer is still walking the streets as a free man. We have an even deeper problem as well, that the systems we have to protect people are failing. Even during run-ins with people who are mandatory reporters of abuse, like teachers, nurses, and law enforcement, they may not actually notice subtle signs of abuse. Even if they do know what is happening, they may not have enough evidence to put abusers away for good. When there is not enough evidence to put someone in prison, they basically just get a slap on the wrist. The police cannot protect an abused woman all the time from her deranged ex-husband who keeps showing up outside her house or running into her at the grocery store. In this sort of situation, a woman can only reliably count on herself for ensuring her own safety. And since generally speaking women are not as strong as men, a firearm can be the equalizer she needs. Obviously, she would need to learn the specific laws of her area to know what circumstances in which she can use deadly force. I'll be showing some quotes from a TED Talk done by a woman who was abused. She points out that domestic violence follows a pattern. The first step is to charm the victim. Then the abuser isolates the victim, followed by introducing the threat of violence. The first incident of abuse is always a defining moment. You have to admit that this is actually abuse, that the person you fell in love with is not who you thought they were, that this is a clear sign you have fallen into a carefully laid trap. Above all else, you cannot let your abuser manipulate you into thinking that he's really sorry, or that it will never happen again. She also says that the final step in domestic violence is to kill the victim. She makes the point that she never saw herself as a victim, that she instead saw herself as the only person who could help a troubled man. You have to admit that you cannot change your abuser. You have no obligation to try to change them. Rather, you only have an obligation to guarantee your own safety and the safety of children or pets who are also in danger. Under this TED Talk video, there was a comment that demonstrates how abusers can act after they lose control of their victim. A victim ran away. Her husband followed her, killed her and the friends that were hiding her, before killing himself. Situations like this show how you need to be capable of using lethal force to defend those friends or family that have been put in a life or death situation by their abuser. To be the person who can help those who can't help themselves. People shouldn't be under the impression that police can always save you in time. Even if you call 911 as soon as possible, if they don't get there in just a few minutes, this can easily turn the situation into a murder-suicide instead of just a scary night that you want to forget. Domestic abuse is the realm of manipulative people. Those people who can skillfully wield both fear and love as weapons to keep you a prisoner in your own home. Abuse is just a tool for Machiavellian people to control you, and when they lose control over you, they may straight up just decide to kill you. Though the headline of this news story mentions how Maria wanted people to know about the progression of domestic violence, this was not mentioned in the story itself. So I wanted to share her message and give you just a general idea of what violence escalation may look like. Abusers do not start beating you from day one of the relationship. It gets gradually worse over the time. It goes from a slap that happened once to choking to a weekly beatdown that you just know is going to happen but you can't stop. Then it may become attempted murder or murder. People will obviously want to know why abuse happens in the first place. The short answer is that the abuser obviously knows that he gets something out of this abuse, usually to vent anger and exert control. This former abuser, Jimmy, mentions that he never questioned if what he was doing was wrong. When abusers says that they don't know that abuse was wrong, this shows a lack of morality, not a lack of comprehension. People don't go around knocking their friends unconscious because they know that sort of behavior is wrong. You also have to keep in mind, it's clear that abusers know their actions are wrong when they try to minimize their behavior. Regardless of what is going through the mind of the perpetrator, It matters little to the victims, because violence is still violence. Jimmy also mentions that once he had objectified a woman and showed her that he could get away with hitting her, that's when he would escalate into full-on beatings. So practically speaking, objectification is a psychological tool to allow abuse to happen. This chart of unnatural power and control is aptly named. Healthy relationships are built on things like cooperation, mutual agreement, and respect. So it's important to precisely label and categorize what the tools of an abuser are. I had to relabel the one at the top because this power imbalance or one-sided relationship can clearly happen to both men and women. Therefore, it can't logically be called male privilege if a woman can wield this power or controlling behavior as well. I also wanted to specifically highlight the part about playing mind games, and included Merriam-Webster's definition of gaslighting because abusers frequently use these tactics. Gaslighting is manipulation, pure and simple, which is used to mislead you and warp your view of reality in order to control you. Gaslighting could be used to convince someone that they are forgetful or crazy. For example, the abuser may start leaving the lights on in a room and then start convincing their victim that the victim actually left the lights on. They may also gaslight you into thinking that a normal relationship is one where the man is in control of everything. For this to be true, they have to subtly redefine what it means to be a man. This definition would specifically include that being a man means you innately have both power and privileges that a woman doesn't have. There is a term called DARVO, which stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim, and Offender. Psychological abusers like to use this tactic to make themselves the victim instead of the offender. Because we live in Orwellian times, we have terms like reverse domestic violence, which implies that the opposite of domestic violence is the weak hurting the strong. Most people would say that the opposite of violence is peace, not a different kind of violence. I mention these things because when you have a manufactured term like reverse domestic violence, it directly gives female abusers, for example, the ability to claim that they are the real victims. One more thing about DARVO. It demonstrates the skill abusers can have in totally warping the reality of the situation, which is why they see getting sent to jail as being caused by the person who made the 911 call. They don't see how their actions result in consequences. They see their problems as being solely caused by other people, which is why they can end up with the conclusion that the system is rigged against them. Then they create a superficial reason to justify this belief, to show that they are really the victim. You can tell that non-abusers can also think this way when they label the police as the real bad guys for killing a violent criminal who is reaching for a gun. If you are susceptible to this sort of thinking, it can make it easier for people to manipulate these beliefs to exploit and abuse you. A similar sort of thought process that ignores the fact that actions have consequences can be seen in Maxine Gelman's words. He was shocked that his mother called the police on him when he brutally stabbed his stepfather to death. I would say that he sees his mother calling the police as a sort of betrayal. It's clear that he's used to minimizing the fact that his actions directly caused his imprisonment. It would make him look bad to accept responsibility for his actions, so he would rather blame other people, like the stepfather who was swearing at him, or his mother that called the police. Domestic violence is the result of unhealthy behaviors and ways of thinking, so if we want to prevent more pain, suffering, and preventable loss of life, we need to find a good way to change the minds and behaviors of individuals. That is a difficult thing to accomplish, though. So we need to have some sort of better intervention system, perhaps a nonprofit organization that would work with the school system and the legal system to identify young people who are at risk of becoming abusers. Particularly those people who grew up in abusive households themselves are at risk, because abuse is often a cycle that perpetuates itself. Perhaps we could devise a sort of test that all young adults would complete at school, which would show warning signs. For example, an unhealthy desire for power and control, noticeable lack of empathy, or uncontrolled anger issues. But there's another type of prevention as well, one that we can use in our own lives. We can identify the methods of psychological manipulation that are repeatedly used by abusers. These are controlling behavior, telling you what to do or how to dress; a whirlwind romance, one that involves spending too much time together and ends up with suddenly depriving you of sleep; a push-pull relationship that involves cutting you down if you disobey him, and then affection to reel you back in; isolating you from your friends and family; and finally, gaining your trust by telling you supposed secrets. If you are in an abusive relationship, you need to plan a safe way to leave. The most important part of this plan is having a safe place to escape to and finding a time when you can leave that you won't be noticed. Ideally, you'd want to go to a friend or family member that the abuser does not know about, but has the means of physically protecting you, which would include a firearm and a secure house. You also want to bring important documents, like your social security cards, tax information, banking information, etc., as well as more mundane but necessary items like clothes, keys, medication, and eyeglasses. You may not be able to leave right away because of practical reasons. It may take time to get your own credit card or bank account, though these things don't matter if you are in immediate extreme danger.